The summer of 1943 turned tragic for the 8th Air Force. On August 17th, disaster struck over Schweinfurt, Germany. 60 American B-17 flying fortresses vanished from the sky, trailing smoke and flames that stained the clouds. In a single afternoon, the bombing raid claimed 600 airmen captured or killed. The carnage seemed almost incomprehensible in its scale and suddenness. The architects of that slaughter weren't pilots or anti-aircraft gunners, but radar operators sitting in comfortable bunkers far below. German Würzburg radar stations had detected the approaching bomber streams from 120 miles distant, picking them up long before they could see German soil themselves. With that perfect knowledge, the radar controllers guided their fighter squadrons and anti-aircraft batteries with surgical efficiency. The mathematics of modern air warfare had become brutally simple. Whoever controlled the skies above would be whoever controlled the information below. The losses were mounting faster than anyone could replace them. Over in Britain, RAF Bomber Command was hemorrhaging aircraft. Every 1,000 sorties sent against German targets meant losing 43 bombers. At that pace, the mathematics were terrifying. They would run through their entire supply of trained aircrew long before Germany ran out of targets to defend. Something had to change, but the solution wouldn't come from the obvious places. In a laboratory hidden away by the British government, a Cambridge physicist named Joan Kerrin was pursuing an unconventional path. She was 28 years old, brilliant, and convinced that her colleagues were thinking about the problem wrong. While other scientists focused on building superior radar equipment, Kerrin asked herself a different question entirely. What if instead of making radar better, they could make German radar useless? What if they could fill the enemy's screens with phantom targets? Her answer emerged from something as ordinary as kitchen materials, strips of aluminum foil, nothing more. But these strips possessed precision that kitchen foil never had, cut to exactly half the wavelength of German radar signals, roughly 10.5 centimeters each. They would behave like tiny mirrors, bouncing radar energy back to its source in ways that would overwhelm operators with false contacts. The concept was elegant in its physics and ridiculous in its simplicity. When Kerrin presented her idea to military superiors, she encountered stone-wall resistance. The Air Ministry shook its head firmly. Too risky, they said, too simple by far, too much like winning a technological war with glorified confetti. The decision felt absurd to her, but the military hierarchy wouldn't budge. So while bureaucrats debated, the bombers kept crashing. The men aboard them kept dying, the mathematics kept getting worse. In a barracks at a bomber base in England, Sergeant Tommy Morrison sat at a table, pencil trembling slightly in his hand. He was trying to write a letter, something he'd done easily enough before, but this time the words came harder than they had on the 22 previous occasions. Tomorrow his B-17, the Memphis Belle II, would fly south and east into Bavaria, deeper into Germany than any daylight bombing mission had ventured before. Tonight might be his final chance to put words on paper that made sense, that sounded like the person he actually was. The Bull turret where he worked remained his entire world during those hours at altitude. Nothing but plexiglass and darkness and the constant roar of engines, barely enough space to turn around in. Certainly not enough to feel like a person rather than a piece of equipment. When he'd managed to find a spot at the mess hall table to sit properly for a moment, he'd seized it with both hands. He wrote, "Dear Mum," and then stopped. How could he explain what he knew about German radar? How could he describe the Würzburg system scattered across all of occupied Europe? Each station feeding information to controllers who had turned daylight bombing into a calculated slaughter. 24 hours earlier, 60 flying fortresses had gone down over Schweinfurt. 600 men. Boys he'd shared cigarettes with, played poker with, complained about powdered eggs with in his mess hall. All gone in an afternoon because German ground control could vector their anti-aircraft fire into American formations with 95% accuracy. Morrison had somehow survived 22 missions when statistical probability said he should have been dead by the 11th. Now he needed 3 more to complete his tour. 3 more opportunities for German radar operators to paint their formation on their screens and guide fighters or flak to their exact coordinates through whatever weather or darkness the weather gods provided. He couldn't finish the letter. What could he possibly say that would be true? What comfort existed in telling his mother that American industrial capacity meant nothing against an enemy that could see through the sky itself? 200 miles to the southeast, in a concrete bunker that could withstand most bombing efforts, Klaus Weber sat in the darkness, listening to the whisper of electronics. 26 years old, 2 years of defending German airspace, his fingers moving across controls as naturally as a musician playing an instrument they'd perfected over thousands of hours. In front of him, the green phosphorescent glow of his Würzburg radar scope told him everything about the sky for 50 kilometers in every direction. He knew the signatures of American B-17s the way a musician knows the sound of different instruments. They showed up on his scope as tight clusters, more disciplined than British bombers, maintaining formation integrity with impressive precision. The distinctive pattern made them easy to identify and easier still to track. His station could pick up their approach at 40 miles' distance and maintain contact to within 100 yards, even at 25,000 feet of altitude. The technology represented something genuinely revolutionary. For the first time in human history, the defenders possessed perfect knowledge of what was coming, regardless of weather, darkness, or deception. Aerial warfare had transformed from an art of surprise and maneuver into pure mathematics. The early warning network of German radar stretched from Norway down to Spain, providing air defense commanders with complete awareness of everything approaching their territory. Long-range Freya stations spotted approaching formations at 120 miles out and immediately alerted the regional defense sectors, sending fighter pilots scrambling toward their aircraft. Closer to German targets, the more precise Würzburg stations took over tracking duties, guiding anti-aircraft batteries and searchlight concentrations with mechanical precision that humans could never match. Weber took pride in that precision. He never missed a contact. He never miscalled an altitude or heading. His accuracy meant German fighter pilots found their targets at the best possible angles for attack. His precision meant 88mm guns could bracket bomber formations before American gunners even saw muzzle flashes on the ground below. His calculations helped determine whether Allied airmen would fly home or die over German soil. But tonight, something troubled him. Intelligence reports were coming through about American bomber strength not declining despite the massive losses. New B-17 groups were arriving at English airfields every single week. American aircraft production was exceeding German estimates by margins that seemed almost impossible. The mathematical advantage of German radar technology, that perfect defensive knowledge, couldn't overcome infinite American replacement capacity if current casualty rates continued forever. The thought should have been comforting. Instead, it filled him with unease. Somewhere northwest of Weber's position, working long past midnight in her laboratory, Joan Keren surrounded herself with calculations and aluminum samples. 28 years old, doctorate in physics from Cambridge, living on coffee and determination through 16-hour workdays. She'd spent weeks analyzing captured German radar equipment, testing different patterns and measurements. The physics was elegant once you grasped it. German Würzburg stations operated at 5 and 60 megahertz, a frequency that translated to a wavelength of 53.6 centimeters. Cut aluminum strips to precisely half that wavelength, and they became perfect resonant reflectors. The mathematics weren't speculation. They were established physics, confirmed by decades of electromagnetic research. Her calculations became steadily more specific. Half of 53.6 centimeters meant 26.8 centimeters, which, accounting for manufacturing tolerances and atmospheric variables, meant exactly 27 centimeters. Each strip should be 2 centimeters wide to ensure adequate radar reflection. When deployed from bomber aircraft at 60-second intervals, the strips would create sustained interference patterns lasting through the entire attack run. The physics promised remarkable results. Each bundle of aluminum strips would create radar returns equivalent to what a heavy bomber generated. If you deployed 2,000 bundles from a single aircraft, German radar operators would see 2,000 phantom targets where only one aircraft existed. Scale that effect across an entire bombing formation of 700 aircraft and the enemy's screens would overflow with 1.4 million false contacts. No radar system ever built could process that volume of simultaneous targets. They would simply collapse under the information overload. For the first time since radar's invention, offense could regain advantage over defense through pure electromagnetic theory rather than overwhelming the enemy with more guns and armor and speed. British bombers wouldn't need thicker defensive armor or additional machine guns bristling from their fuselages. They needed aluminum foil strips cut according to precise wavelength physics. The concept violated every assumption underlying current air warfare doctrine. Military planners thought in terms of bigger weapons, stronger defenses, superior aircraft performance. Keren proposed neutralizing German technological superiority with material that cost less than cigarette money per mission, literally kitchen foil from civilian stores. Her solution seemed too simple, too economical, too much like defeating advanced radar with Christmas tree decorations. When she prepared her first formal presentation for Air Ministry officials that October, she documented every aspect with mathematical precision that left absolutely no room for subjective interpretation. Electromagnetic wavelength theory was established science, not speculative technology. German radar frequencies were known quantities, captured from downed aircraft and confirmed through interrogated prisoners. The physics underlying her proposal were simply irrefutable. Properly dimensioned aluminum strips would create massive radar interference regardless of anyone's personal opinions about the method's elegance or conventional appeal. The Air Ministry's reaction came swiftly and definitively. Absolutely not. Group Captain Henderson, Director of Air Intelligence, dismissed the proposal as backroom theorizing completely divorced from operational reality. The technical feasibility wasn't really the primary concern, though. What bothered the planners more was the idea of strategic reciprocity. If Britain deployed radar countermeasures over German territory, then obviously Germany would capture samples, reverse engineer the technique, and deploy similar countermeasures against British radar installations defending England itself. The strategic calculus seemed clear to military planners. Britain's very survival depended on maintaining radar superiority over home territory. Chain home stations provided the only early warning system against German bombing attacks. Coastal radar installations guided RAF fighters onto incoming enemy aircraft. Any technology that degraded radar effectiveness posed existential threats to British homeland defense, regardless of what tactical advantages might be gained against German targets. Bomber Harris proved even more dismissive. During their October meeting, he listened to her calculations and then shook his head. "Dr. Keren, I appreciate scientific enthusiasm, but warfare isn't conducted in laboratory conditions," he said. "My air crews face real flak, real fighters, real weather. I won't gamble their lives on untested theories about aluminum confetti defeating German engineering." Harris had built his entire reputation through straightforward operational planning, overwhelming German defenses through superior numbers and aggressive tactics rather than clever technological solutions. The institutional resistance reflected something deeper than simple skepticism. Professional military officers fundamentally distrusted civilian scientists who proposed revolutionary changes without understanding the operational complexities. Keren had never flown a combat mission. She'd never coordinated 1,000-bomber raids. She'd never watched aircraft spiral earthward carrying colleagues and friends. Her mathematical confidence seemed naive to commanders who measured success in surviving aircrews rather than theoretical electromagnetic interference patterns. But Keren refused to abandon physics for politics. She continued refining her calculations, preparing detailed technical specifications for aluminum strip production, developing deployment procedures that would maximize radar interference while minimizing operational disruption to bomber formations. If institutional blindness prevented official testing, she would accumulate irrefutable evidence that forced reconsideration. By December 1943, her laboratory held complete technical documentation for what she privately called window, aluminum strips cut to precise dimensions for optimal radar reflection. Production requirements were minimal. Standard aircraft aluminum, readily available cutting equipment, simple bundling procedures requiring no specialized training. Production costs would total less than $5 per aircraft, cheaper than the fuel burned during taxi operations. The human cost of institutional delay mounted daily. December bomber losses had exceeded sustainable replacement rates. Experienced crews were dying over German targets while potentially life-saving technology accumulated dust in filing cabinets. Keren worked 16-hour days, driven by growing certainty that bureaucratic caution was committing murder through mathematical inevitability. Physics offered salvation, but military hierarchy demanded proof before permitting trials that would generate that proof. The paradox consumed her. Everything changed in July 1944 when Bomber Harris received casualty analysis from the Additional Research Section delivered with clinical precision. Bomber losses had reached 5.2% per mission, more than double the sustainable replacement rate of 2.5%. At current attrition levels, Bomber Command would exhaust its entire supply of trained aircrew within 8 months, regardless of how many replacement aircraft production facilities could manufacture. The statistics transformed from abstract numbers into personal reality when Harris recognized names on the casualty lists. Quadrant commanders he'd personally promoted. Navigator instructors he'd recruited. Wireless operators barely old enough to shave. The turning point arrived through Winston Churchill's direct intervention. The Prime Minister summoned Harris to Downing Street with a single urgent question. "Arthur, can we continue losing crews at this rate?" The answer was mathematically obvious. Churchill's scientific advisor, Professor Lindemann, had calculated total projected losses. The first 2,000 bombers, 70,000 aircrew members before achieving decisive strategic impact against German industrial capacity. The numbers were unsustainable by any measure of military or political acceptability. Churchill's directive proved unambiguous. Test the physicists' aluminum strips. If they work, deploy immediately. If they fail, Britain accepts current losses and prays for American industrial miracles. The Prime Minister's logic was brutally simple. Britain faced strategic defeat through mathematical attrition. Conventional tactics guaranteed continued slaughter without decisive results. Experimental countermeasures offered potential salvation with acceptable strategic risks. Harris returned from Downing Street with authorization for immediate operational trials. On July 21st, Keren got word. The message was urgent. Bomber crews needed to prepare window bundles for combat operations starting within just 72 hours. Their destination would be Hamburg, Germany's second-largest city and the nation's primary center for U-boat construction. Everything depended on getting this right. Operation Gomorrah would become the most ambitious bombing campaign the RAF had ever attempted. 4 nights in a row of maximum effort attacks, designed to systematically destroy German industrial capacity through relentless area bombardment. Hamburg represented the perfect testing ground for whether window could actually work under real combat conditions. The city boasted Germany's most sophisticated air defense system. 54 heavy flak batteries equipped with Würzburg radar, 300 searchlights, all coordinated through precision tracking systems and permanent Luftwaffe night fighter squadrons operating from nearby airfields. If aluminum strips could actually blind German radar over Hamburg, they could blind it anywhere. Keren supervised window bundle production with meticulous obsession. Each bundle had to contain exactly 2,000 aluminum strips, each one individually cut to precisely 27 centimeters length and 2 centimeters width. Quality control inspectors used micrometers to verify every single dimension, rejecting any strip that deviated more than 1 millimeter from specifications. There was no room for error. The physics demanded absolute precision. Strips that were even slightly wrong would produce minimal radar interference while simultaneously alerting German engineers that the British had developed countermeasures. The specifications got distributed to bomber squadrons on July the 22nd. Every aircraft would carry window bundles stored in designated compartments with individual crewmen assigned to deployment duties. Release intervals were calculated down to the second. 1 bundle every minute throughout the entire bombing run. That was how they'd create sustained radar interference from the moment German detection systems first picked them up until they left the target area completely behind. The deployment procedure required no specialized equipment beyond manual bundle ejection through existing flare chutes. Flight Sergeant Bill Reed received his window briefing aboard Lancaster ND-749 at RAF Waddington on July the 23rd. 22 years old, born and raised in Manchester, he'd completed 21 missions with 4 still remaining before his tour ended. Reed's job was simple enough on paper. British window bundles through the aircraft's flare chute every 60 seconds based on precise timing. Not judgment, not what he thought was happening around him, just the clock. The briefing officer made it clear that absolute compliance with the deployment schedule meant everything, regardless of combat conditions or crew casualties. Reed understood the stakes, even if the science behind it all remained a mystery to him. German radar guided night fighters onto bomber formations with lethal precision. If window degraded that enemy tracking capability, it improved his crew's chances of survival. Whether window actually worked through electromagnetic physics or something bordering on supernatural hardly mattered to him. What mattered was coming home alive to finish his operational tour. Reed had somehow survived 21 missions when the statistics said pilots like him should have died around mission 11. 4 more flights meant borrowed time that could end in an instant. A radar-guided flak burst, a fighter interception, any number of ways the sky could kill you. The human element went beyond technical specifications. Reed's crew had developed survival routines built on superstition rather than science. The same breakfast before every mission, identical pre-flight procedures, personal talismans carried in identical places. Window represented another ritual element that might influence mathematical probability through mechanisms nobody really understood. If pushing aluminum bundles through a chute every minute increased survival chances, Reed would execute the procedure with machine-like precision, regardless of his own doubts about fighting radar with what amounted to kitchen foil. July 24, 1943 marked Window's operational debut. 747 RAF bombers departed English airfields carrying 92 million aluminum strips, precisely cut to defeat German Würzburg radar frequencies. Each aircraft carried identical window payloads, 46 bundles containing 2,000 strips each. The total metallic surface area equaled what 17 heavy bombers would normally have displayed to radar per individual aircraft. The mathematics promised spectacular radar interference if current calculations proved accurate under combat conditions. Reed's Lancaster crossed the North Sea at 22,000 feet altitude. Approaching German coastal defenses at 11:37 p.m., he positioned himself beside the flare chute, with window bundles stacked in deployment sequence, his stopwatch synchronized with his navigator's timing signals. The first bundle would go out at the German territorial boundary, subsequent bundles at 60-second intervals throughout the bombing run. Reed's mechanical precision would determine whether electromagnetic theory could defeat German radar supremacy through properly timed aluminum confetti. The fate of Allied strategic bombing hung on mathematical calculations made by a 28-year-old Cambridge physicist and executed by wireless operators who understood timing better than wavelength physics. Success would revolutionize aerial warfare. Failure would confirm skepticism about fighting advanced technology with strips of household aluminum foil. German radar operators waited in concrete bunkers, unaware that their technological superiority faced systematic destruction through precisely cut metal, reflecting their own electromagnetic signals back as chaos. Unteroffizier Klaus Weber adjusted his headphones and settled into his familiar routine at Würzburg Radar Station, Mammoth 7, positioned 12 kilometers southeast of Hamburg's industrial district. July 24, 1943, 11:47 p.m., British bomber formations appeared on his scope, exactly as intelligence had predicted. 747 aircraft approaching from the northwest in standard RAF night attack formation. Weber's 2 years defending German airspace had taught him to read enemy formations like musical notation. The tight clustering of Avro Lancasters, the looser formations of Handley Page Halifaxes, the distinctive radar signatures that allowed precise aircraft identification at 40-mile range. But tonight, something was catastrophically wrong. Weber's scope displayed 11,000 individual aircraft contacts where intelligence reported fewer than 800 bombers. The impossibility strained his professional confidence. German reconnaissance flights had photographed British airfields that afternoon, counting parked bombers with photographic precision. RAF operational capacity couldn't support formations exceeding 1,000 aircraft. Yet Weber's Würzburg station tracked contacts extending 20 miles in every direction, a bomber stream that would require every aircraft in the Royal Air Force flying simultaneously. The electronic chaos began at 11:48 p.m. when the first window bundles fell through 20,000 feet of North German airspace. Weber watched his carefully organized radar picture dissolve into electromagnetic pandemonium. Individual aircraft contacts multiplied exponentially, creating a solid wall of radar returns that overwhelmed his tracking calculations. Where German doctrine required precise vectors for night fighter interception, Weber now faced an impenetrable cloud of false targets that made accurate guidance impossible. His training emphasized systematic analysis under combat pressure. Weber attempted to distinguish authentic bomber contacts from apparent electronic interference by analyzing flight patterns and formation discipline. Genuine aircraft maintained consistent headings and airspeeds. False contacts should display erratic movement or impossible flight characteristics. But the contacts flooding his screen moved with authentic bomber behavior: consistent altitude, steady heading toward Hamburg, proper formation spacing that suggested coordinated navigation. The psychological impact proved as devastating as the technical disruption. Weber had spent 2 years developing absolute confidence in German radar superiority. Würzburg precision tracking had transformed night fighting from random interception attempts into calculated destruction of enemy formations. German pilots relied on radar vectors with mathematical certainty, approaching predetermined intercept points where British bombers waited exactly as predicted. The system had achieved mechanical reliability that reduced aerial combat to geometry and timing. Now Weber faced the collapse of technological certainty. His scope displayed thousands of targets where hundreds should exist. German night fighters vectored toward phantom formations found empty sky. Messerschmitt 110 pilots reported negative contact after negative contact, burning fuel in pursuit of electronic ghosts while authentic bombers proceeded unmolested toward their targets. The electromagnetic advantage that had defined German air defense dissolved into electronic chaos that favored attackers over defenders. Flight Lieutenant Hartmann, vectored toward what appeared to be a concentrated Lancaster formation, radioed his frustration at 11:59 p.m. Mammut 7, I show negative contact at assigned coordinates. Repeat, negative contact. Request updated vector. Weber stared at his scope, displaying 17 aircraft contacts at Hartmann's reported position. The pilot was flying through the center of what radar indicated was a major bomber concentration, yet visual contact remained impossible. The contradiction defied physical reality. Similar reports flooded German air defense networks throughout northern Germany. Night fighter pilots described flying through massive radar contacts that yielded no visual targets. Ground controllers tracked bomber formations that seemed to exist only on electronic displays. Flak battery commanders received fire control solutions for targets that proved impossible to engage visually, despite perfect weather conditions and optimal visibility. The German response revealed institutional inflexibility under unprecedented circumstances. Luftwaffe doctrine assumed radar accuracy as absolute baseline for all tactical decisions. If radar contacts contradicted visual observation, training mandated trusting electronic data over human perception. German night fighters continued pursuing phantom targets based on ground radar guidance, expending fuel and ammunition against empty sky, while authentic bombers proceeded toward Hamburg without significant interference. Weber attempted systematic analysis of the electronic chaos flooding his scope. The false contacts displayed certain consistent characteristics: identical radar cross-sections suggesting uniform construction, perfectly synchronized movement patterns indicating coordinated deployment, an electromagnetic signature matching genuine aircraft returns with suspicious precision. The interference seemed too organized for natural atmospheric phenomena, too consistent for random equipment malfunction, too effective for accidental occurrence. The technical sophistication implied deliberate British countermeasures rather than spontaneous radar failure. Weber realized he was witnessing systematic electronic warfare designed to exploit German dependence on radar-guided air defense. The British had somehow identified Würzburg operating frequencies and deployed countermeasures calibrated to create maximum electromagnetic interference. His radar station was being deliberately blinded through enemy technical innovation rather than equipment malfunction. By midnight, German air defense coordination had collapsed completely. Regional controllers reported tracking contradictory formation movements that violated basic physics. Fighter squadrons scattered across empty sky, pursuing targets that existed only on radar screens. Flak batteries fired at electronic contacts that yielded no visual confirmation despite perfect visibility conditions. The systematic breakdown revealed German tactical vulnerability. Absolute dependence on radar accuracy had created strategic fragility when that accuracy was deliberately compromised. Weber continued tracking the chaos with professional dedication, despite growing certainty that his equipment was being systematically defeated. 11,000 phantom contacts continued eastward toward Hamburg, while authentic bomber formations remained hidden within the electronic storm. German night fighters burned fuel, pursuing ghosts. Flak batteries expended ammunition against invisible targets. The mathematical advantage of radar-guided defense had been neutralized through British innovation that transformed German technological superiority into tactical liability. The Hamburg raid proceeded with minimal German interference, while defenders fired at electromagnetic shadows created by precisely cut strips of British aluminum foil. August 3rd brought Weber the evidence that confirmed his worst fears about German technological vulnerability. Hamburg lay in ruins after 8 consecutive nights of RAF bombing attacks that had proceeded with minimal interference from radar-guided defenses. Weber's Würzburg station had tracked thousands of phantom targets, while authentic bombers destroyed Germany's second-largest city virtually unopposed. The casualty reports painted a picture of systematic defensive failure. 42,600 German civilians dead, 37,000 wounded, 900,000 evacuated from a metropolitan area that no longer existed as a functional urban center. The technical analysis arrived through German intelligence channels on August 5th. German engineers had recovered intact samples of British countermeasure materials scattered across Hamburg's devastated streets. Aluminum strips precisely cut to 26.8 centimeters length, exactly half the wavelength of Würzburg radar frequency. The mathematical precision was undeniable. British scientists knew German radar specifications better than German radar operators knew them. The electromagnetic theory underlying the countermeasures represented sophisticated understanding of resonant reflection physics that German technical intelligence had never suspected existed in British laboratories. Weber examined the recovered aluminum strips with growing professional humiliation. Each strip bore manufacturing tolerances measured in fractions of millimeters, indicating industrial production rather than experimental deployment. The British had mass-produced radar countermeasures specifically calibrated to defeat German Würzburg frequencies, suggesting long-term intelligence collection and systematic technical analysis of captured equipment. German assumptions about technological superiority had been systematically dismantled through enemy innovation that exploited fundamental radar physics. The strategic implications transcended tactical disappointment. German air defense doctrine assumed radar invincibility as the foundation for all defensive planning. Würzburg precision tracking enabled efficient resource allocation. Night fighters vectored toward confirmed targets rather than random patrols. Flak batteries concentrated on actual formation coordinates rather than area suppression. Strike-like coordination based on electronic tracking rather than visual acquisition. The aluminum strip countermeasures had transformed German technological advantages into systematic vulnerabilities by rendering radar guidance unreliable. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring's response revealed institutional denial rather than adaptive innovation. His August 7th directive blamed Hamburg's destruction on British trickery and unsportsmanlike conduct, while demanding immediate countermeasures against enemy deception tactics. The language reflected psychological inability to accept that German technological superiority could be defeated through superior British science rather than numerical overwhelming or fortunate circumstances. Goering ordered development of radar equipment immune to metallic interference, seemingly unaware that such immunity violated basic electromagnetic physics. German technical teams attempted various solutions to the aluminum strip problem throughout August 1943. Radar operators experimented with frequency modifications designed to avoid British countermeasure wavelengths, only to discover that the enemy deployed multiple strip lengths calibrated to different German radar frequencies simultaneously. Filter circuits intended to distinguish authentic aircraft from metallic debris proved unable to differentiate between genuine bombers and properly dimensioned aluminum reflectors moving at identical velocities through identical atmospheric conditions. The human cost of technological failure became personal for Weber during his final shift at Mammoth 7 on August 15th. His younger brother Dieter, a Messerschmitt 110 pilot with Night Fighter Squadron 2, had been killed pursuing phantom radar contacts over Bremen while British bombers destroyed the city's submarine construction facilities. Dieter had followed ground radar vectors with absolute confidence, flying directly into concentrated flak fire while chasing electronic ghosts created by British aluminum strips. Weber's professional expertise had contributed to his brother's death through systematic radar deception that German technology could not overcome. The mathematical vindication of British innovation appeared in German loss statistics compiled through September 1943. Allied bomber casualties had dropped from 5.2% per mission to 1.8% following window deployment, a reduction representing approximately 15,000 Allied aircrews who survived operations they would have died in under previous conditions. German night fighter effectiveness decreased by 75%, despite unchanged aircraft performance and pilot training levels. Flak battery accuracy fell from 3.4% hit probability to 0.7% against formations deploying aluminum countermeasures. The strategic revolution extended beyond immediate tactical advantages. British aluminum strips cost approximately $2,050 per aircraft per mission, less expensive than fuel for ground taxi operations. German radar installations represented millions of Reichsmarks in sophisticated electronic equipment, precision manufacturing, and specialized technical training. The cost ratio of countermeasures versus radar systems approached mathematical absurdity. 10 cents worth of properly cut aluminum foil could neutralize radar equipment worth more than a heavy bomber. Flight Sergeant Bill Reed completed his operational tour on September 20th, 1943, having deployed window bundles during his final 4 missions over German targets. He returned to Manchester with no understanding of electromagnetic physics, but absolute certainty that pushing aluminum strips through flare chutes had contributed to his survival. Reed's mechanical precision in maintaining 60-second deployment intervals had helped create sustained radar interference that protected not only his crew, but entire bomber formations from German interception attempts. The institutional transformation of Allied strategic bombing reflected Dr. Joan Curran's revolutionary insight about fighting radar with properly applied physics rather than superior firepower. Window deployment became standard operating procedure for every RAF and 8th Air Force mission beginning September 1943. The electromagnetic countermeasures that Air Ministry officials had dismissed as scientific nonsense, fighting radar with confetti, had fundamentally altered the strategic balance of aerial warfare through mathematical precision rather than military intuition. German radar supremacy, built through years of technical innovation and operational experience, collapsed within weeks of encountering systematic electromagnetic countermeasures designed by a 28-year-old Cambridge physicist working in a cluttered laboratory. The destruction of Hamburg demonstrated that scientific understanding could overcome institutional military wisdom when properly applied to exploit enemy technological vulnerabilities. Sometimes the greatest military victories emerged not from firepower or numbers, but from understanding exactly how enemies saw the battlefield, then systematically destroying their ability to see it at all.